All right.
Hi there.
Hi.
It's so good to be with you, Lisa. For those of you who are watching this, I'm Tallie from Thermography Clinic, and this is my now good friend, Lisa. I've gotten to know Lisa over the last few years. She comes to our thermography clinic, and I asked her actually to have a conversation that we could record because I'm often inspired by her and how she's made decisions about how she dealt with hearing news that she had cancer in one of her breasts and how she's handled it. And so I'm very grateful, Lisa, that you agreed to talk to me about this. So let's just have a great conversation like we normally do.
Right.
And we're just recording it.
Okay.
So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you.
So first of all, when did you get the news initially?
So the diagnosis news came in March of 2019. So the very end of March. So we're coming on to, what is it, 4 years now? Wow.
Yeah, 4 years. Okay. And then
Crazy.
what was it? Yeah. What was it like for you when you got that news?
Well, I think it's always important to preface the day that you get the news with, kind of the day that you find the lump or you have some kind of suspicion, because that process up until could be like 2 or 3 months. That's how it was
Right.
for me. And so by the time I got the news at the end of March of 2019, I had already kind of been thinking about it. And, you're going through scans and mammograms and biopsies and all these things, which, never really sat right, but you want an answer and you want to know. And so you kind of have to go through that situation. You don't have to, but it's, for me, I chose to go through that situation where I really wanted to understand what was happening. So by the time I got the news, I can't really say I was entirely surprised, but I was still shocked. So, it's the initial shock of, oh God. And so I was talking to the surgeon at the time about, the kind of diagnosis it was and, what they were going to suggest doing next and that kind of thing. And it is kind of like a bit of a talking head. I'm not really registering what's happening. I mean, I registered the main bit, but then the rest of it kind of just fell away. And I think it's because I had already made the decision that if I was diagnosed with breast cancer, that I was going to approach it holistically. So anything she was suggesting was very much approached like, okay, thank you very much for your time. And just give me the information and I'm going to go now. So, yeah. And the surgeon that delivered the news to me, I didn't really have a connection with her. So, I knew that whatever I decided, she probably wasn't going to be part of that journey. And I was okay with that. I never really told her. I just said, thank you very much. And I made it clear that I wanted to digest the news and then I wanted to understand my options and just look at things. I didn't say anything specific to her at that time. But I did know that I would likely take a holistic approach. And that's what I decided to do. So then once the initial shock wears off and there's tears and there's thinking of all the worst case scenarios and what ifs and, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me. And not because, I mean, why wouldn't it happen to me? It's like, it can happen to anyone. So, but I did go through that initial, tears and fear, and it didn't really last too long. Because I don't spend a lot of time in that mode generally, because I just don't find it very useful. And I don't like feeling that way. So I was very conscious of the fact that, this point forward, things have to change and drastically. Because I knew that, all the choices are now made based on this information. So, because even though I had a suspicion that it was going to be a diagnosis of breast cancer, I still didn't want to live like that. I wanted to still, wait until I got the news. But then when I got the news, that's when everything really changed. So, yeah.
Right. Wow. Okay. So you kind of came into this already having a sense that if I get this diagnosis, this is the way I want to do it. very likely. But like, I'm even thinking, I remember the first time I was pregnant thinking, I'm going to have my baby naturally. And then I'm in the situation. And, my first baby, I ended up being induced and having all kinds of interventions and things like that.
Right.
And, thankfully after that, I did go more naturally with other babies. But, it's one thing to go into it thinking, if this happens, then I'm going to do it this way. But then it's another when you're actually in the experience, in the journey. So how did you, once you kind of came down from the emotional impact and so on, how did you then go through your decision-making process to decide, okay, here's my next step. Here's how I'm actually going to do this.
Right. So, I got home that afternoon. My husband was waiting. He knew because I had spoken to him on the phone. And again, once we both sort of got through the tears and that night, I just went to bed. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to go to bed and let the tears roll. And tomorrow's a new day. And tomorrow we start putting a plan together. And so when I was sitting with the surgeon, I think the fact that her and I didn't necessarily connect helped, because I thought to myself, even if I was going to do surgery, even if I was going to do conventional therapy, it would not be with you, because I just knew that we didn't have that trust connection that I needed. I mean, I don't know how she felt. She probably thought, everything's normal. But I just kind of didn't have a really good sense with her from prior appointments. So I didn't, and because they wanted me to have the surgery in order to tell me what stage I was at. And so I said, well, what happens if I don't do the surgery? Well, of course, that's ridiculous. You have to have the surgery. And I said, no, I don't have to. And she said, well, then we can't tell you what stage you're at. And I said, okay, that's fine. Because for me, I don't need to know that. I don't. And sometimes I think it could be a detriment too, because then, suddenly there's more information coming in and there's a lot more fear involved. But, prior to going into the appointment, I do take a spiritual approach to my life. So I was very much, talking to my guides. I had my protection bubble, and I was just like, stay strong, because they can, and I've heard horror stories of how people wanted to approach it holistically, similar to what you said. But then when they were in the minute, they were like the fear and the this is what's going to happen. And they start bringing their family into it. And before you know it, you're caught up in this whirlwind of what isn't necessarily the reality of the situation. So, fast forward, go ahead.
Did you have support? I mean, I know your husband's been supportive of you taking this approach. Did you find that other family members, people who are influential in your life, were they supportive initially?
Well, I didn't tell anyone.
Okay.
So I did not tell any of my close family, immediate family, parents, sister, brother. I didn't tell anybody until I had a plan. And so that's how I approached it. I knew the select friends and people that I was going to go to, and I wanted to get, not necessarily, I wanted to get their opinion. Like, look, this is what I'm doing. I know you can help me. What are you thinking? And of course, the people that I went to, I knew would support me in a holistic approach. So I got in contact with those people the next day. I set up time to sit with them. In the meantime, I started to hatch a plan, and I just hatched the plan myself. I thought, okay, I need someone that's going to help me with nutrition. I need someone that's going to help me from a naturopathic perspective with supplements. I need someone that's going to help me with, like energy work, any kind of thing that can help me unblock. So I really took the approach of, okay, I have to put the team together, because the team is not going to be provided for me. And I knew enough people because, I just knew enough people in this, not the industry necessarily, because it's a very different industry, but I just started to Google. I started to Google things. I started to ask people. I started to look for referrals. I pulled the people together that I knew would be able to maybe suggest or guide me. And then it was just a matter of finding people that could help. having conversations with people. And so I started to put that plan together. I interviewed a few people,
Mhm.
like a naturopath and a nutritionist, because again, I wanted to make sure that we were a fit. I wanted to make sure that there was a level of trust there. And so not everybody, I didn't just go with the first person I found, which is, the tendency, because there could be this urgency, I've got to
Right.
find somebody. But there's so much information online, which is a bit of a double-edged sword. But
Right.
I ended up buying a lot of books. And I knew the books that I needed because I had heard them in the grapevine of people who had cancer or, tried a holistic approach after maybe the chemo didn't work or something like that. So I had a lot of information, and there's so much information out there that I just started to pull it all in and, kind of devour as much as I could to kind of create what I called was like the next 60 days, 60 to 90 days, because in that 60 to 90 days, I had to put the team together. So I was kind of, for that first, I would say, good 30 to 60 days, kind of on my own. But I think intuitively, I just knew what to do. I decided to go vegan, raw, which sounds very, very hard, but it's not when the size of the prize is big enough.
Right.
And that's really what drove me, is that, I cut out the sugars, I cut out the carbs. Like I just went to really clean eating, because the diet was the one thing I knew I could control. Because at this point, I was kind of feeling like out of control, like, oh my God, I've got to put this team together. And there's this kind of, how do we do this? And so I was like, okay, what do I have control over? I have control over my diet, which is a huge part, because I like the sweets and I like the cocktails and I like those things. And I just knew that had to end. And not forever necessarily, but just for the next 60 days, let's do a bit of a clean detox. Let's get our head clear while we're making these decisions. And it was one of these quick, drastic changes, because that's how I like to approach things. And it's been that way for me for a while. It's like, I like to try things. I like to test things. I like to kind of push myself, see what I'm capable of, because I always knew, like, I could do this. Of course I could do this. Everyone can do it. It's just, it requires a certain amount of discipline. It requires a certain amount of, kind of care and consideration. And it requires a certain amount of trust, which I didn't always have throughout the whole process. It sort of ebbs and flows, but it became easier as I realized that this doesn't have to be the way everyone thinks it is.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, there's a lot of strength and power in your speaking, and, for some people who are listening to me think, wow, I don't know if I could do that. It's, and maybe people are listening and thinking, wow, maybe I can do that, now that I'm hearing this, right? So,
right.
It's fantastic. So what would you say is, I guess, here's a question. Did you ever find yourself doubting along the way that maybe this is, maybe I've done something wrong, maybe I should have done something different here?
Yeah, I think the doubt does creep in. And I'm just going to go back to your previous question, which I realized I didn't really answer, is how did, what were the immediate people in my life? I can't remember the exact question, but how did
it was more like, how did you make the decision?
Yeah. How did I make the decision is because I just knew. I just knew. I'm like, I have seen enough to know that conventional treatment is not for me. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. I'm not going to say it's, it's wrong. I'm just saying that's not for me. My quality of life is important to me. And I think I could do it.
So that's part of the decision making right there,
There's
right?
the faith.
So just to unpack the thinking is
right.
Let me look at what's important to me. Okay, my lifestyle is important to me. My right. And so to imagine myself going through this kind of treatment, and I've seen what it's like for people, I'm not willing to do that. maybe other
Yeah.
people can, and I'm not judging them for that,
No,
but not for me. So that's part of the
not for
decision
me.
making. Okay, got that.
And when I did tell my family and my close friends and all the people, because I already put a plan together, when I told them, I didn't just tell them and then that was it. I told them, and then we moved into this is what I'm going to be doing. So that I
Right.
didn't leave them hanging with, oh my God, what are you going to do? And how are you going to do this? It's like, it wasn't necessarily about the news. It was about the news and this is what the plan is. So I haven't, just so
Yeah.
people understood that I didn't approach it kind of willy-nilly. And, there was consideration and thought put into it, but there was also consideration and thought as to how people were going to handle the news. And I thought the best way for people to handle the news is to know that there's a solid plan behind this. And my husband was there to support. And so when people heard that, they were like, oh, okay. All right. Like it
So
wasn't
this is
as
very
dramatic.
right. This is very well. That's very good that it's not dramatic. You weren't coming to them in a moment of drama and
Right.
despair. I mean, the way you're sharing it now, there doesn't seem to have been drama and despair. There seems to me to have been some very natural and valid emotions, like the
Yeah.
crying and the wow, this is happening to me. But there's also a sense of, okay, who am I going to be about this? And how am I going to be responsible for every step going forward? Like you said, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
So, so there's, you could say that that's maybe part of your personality. And maybe that's something that other people can kind of pick up on, right? As an inspiration piece. But the fact that you are talking to the people in your life, having thought it through and having had a plan, like you said, it creates, you're thinking about other people, first of all,
Mhm.
that's also, it's not just, oh, me, woe is me.
Right.
It's how are other people going to handle this? So therefore, how can I, because you want to have that support, right?
Sure.
So the
Sure.
way you did it was enabling them to be able to be with not just the news, but to be with who you are
Yes.
about this.
Yes. Because what I find too is that people will often mirror what it is that you're feeling as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to mirror, tears and upset and this and that. And if they want to do that, I mean, it was entirely up to them, although I didn't get that response from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I don't know if it was because I hit them with the news of the diagnosis, but then I hit them with the news of how I was going to approach it. I don't know which was maybe more shocking for them. So, but because I was okay, like, I'm like, look at me, I'm okay. And if I didn't know, then I wouldn't have known. So that has always kind of been my approach is, I wouldn't have known unless I found this lump and went through all the process of it. And so I wanted to maintain that I'm still me. It's still the same person. And it's just, we need to make some changes. I knew that I needed to
Yeah.
make some changes. So back to your question about the doubt,
Yes.
because I don't want to gloss over that, because I think it's important for people to understand that there are moments where, I kind of went like, oh God, this is hard. Like there were some
Mm-hmm.
hard days.
Yeah.
And, and it's not necessarily, am I doing the right thing? But is it like, is this, is this the best way? And am I, is this like, what is the result going to be? And, it's that fear that creeps in. And that really is the part that anyone who's going through anything similar to this that's what needs to be dealt with immediately, is the fear, because it will railroad everything. It can railroad everything, the sleep, the discipline, everything. So that's something that I've always kind of kept in check. And
How did you keep it in check?
well, sometimes you don't know you're in fear until like it's really expressing itself, or
Mm-hmm.
there's sleepless nights, or there's tears, or there's snapping, anything that is the stressor. And then I just have to take a step back. I'm like, okay, wait a second, who's in control here right now? And that's literally a question to myself. and who's in control here, and what's going on. And through this process, I've done a little bit or a lot of inner child work. And
Yeah.
I have found the best tip for me anyway, was to just ask that inner child, like, what is going on? Because the inner child will always answer truthfully. And so if I'm not ready to be truthful with myself, I will ask my inner child. My inner child is like 4 years old, a little 4-year-old Lisa. I can picture what she's wearing, and I would ask her, and she is very honest with me. And then I will step into the adult role of comforting her and letting her know, like, look, I know you're scared. I know you don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we're in this together and we could do this. I've seen people do it. I've heard of people doing it. And it's not necessarily easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's so dang rewarding. It's incredible. Like, it's just worth all of the unknowns and knowns and all of the strength and all of the non-strength and all of the, doubt, and then the certainty. Like, it's all worth it, because you are in control and you're empowered to really take control of your life, and not just from a health perspective, but once you take control, once I took control, I'll speak for myself. Once I took control of my health and my diet and all of, those sort of outwardly things, the other stuff starts to follow. And you don't really even have to try too hard, because everything starts to shift. I started to be more honest with myself. I started to look at things a little bit differently. I looked at the people in my life. I looked at who I shared with and when I shared with them and how I shared with them. And, and in all of this, I'm trying to still be, a good friend and a good daughter and a wife and all of these things. So it's that balance too of figuring out, how do I heal and work on myself, but not necessarily become vacant to the people around me, because I still want to be there for them as well, because everyone's going through stuff. I just happen to have a piece that, is kind of a big one.
Right. Wow. That was really amazing. The whole picture that you just presented about how how you handle those tough moments, that you connect to that inner child. It's such a vivid description and very moving, actually. And it sounds to me like almost like you're coaching yourself.
Yes.
Right? It's power to coach yourself. But when you step away in a sense, that it's like as if it's someone else. It's your inner child. It's you as a child, but it's like it's someone else. And we all have the ability to help and advise other people.
Yes.
Right? It's so much easier to see things in other people than it is in ourselves. So I find that's a very powerful piece right there, right? Is to kind of separate yourself out for a moment, and like you're talking to someone else, like, okay, so what is it that you're feeling? And the inner child might say, I'm scared, or I'm worried, or whatever it is. And then you can help that inner child of yours. That's beautiful. I just want to kind of underline that.
Yeah, it's a really amazing tool that I have found, because when you're speaking to your inner child, you are speaking to a child. So everything becomes very simple. It's not too complicated. The words are very simple, and you're kind, people are usually very kind to children, hopefully.
Right.
But, and so, and if, and I'm very kind with her, because I know that it is a wounded child in there. So, and that just happens to be what is being reflected right now. So that's just been a really good tip. And a lot of these tips come from the therapy and the practitioners that I work with. And, these are all tools that I've learned while, dealing with the diagnosis. And
right. So say a bit about that. Okay. So just kind of list out, who are the practitioners and the kind of team around you?
So immediately when I was diagnosed, it was a naturopath, a nutritionist. I did see my medical doctor, my family medical doctor, occasionally if I needed blood work and, kind of those basic things. And then I was seeing a therapist, like a talk therapy psychotherapist, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then I was seeing a woman who does bioenergy work. So she
Okay.
works with energy in the body. It's a shaman. It's learned from, her technique is learned from a shaman. Those were, I think, the immediate people. And I say I think because it's now, we're coming on to 4 years later, and it's quite different now. I've also done, I was seeing someone for Rolfing, which is also structural integration. It's very deep body work into the fascia. So it's not like massage therapy, which is kind of more surfacey. This gets really into the fascia. And that helps with just kind of trauma and moving things through the body and that kind of thing. And a lot of the things I kind of came and went with, like I tried that, and then I would try something else. But right now, as it stands, because then it got to a point where I didn't really need to see a nutritionist anymore. Like I kind of had that under control, and I was starting to introduce stuff in, and so, he said, like, you can still come and see me, but there's really nothing new we could be really discovering here. So that's why I decided, and the talk therapy as well. I dealt with some, childhood trauma that needed to be dealt with. And so I had a therapist that helped me to deal with that. And then once that was kind of not, and it's never really dealt with for me, it's always there. But once the initial dealing with it was there, then I started to move away from talk therapy, because I was starting to be able to figure things out on my own. And so it was just there if I needed it. And so as it stands right now, I see an acupuncturist who is amazing and just an amazing being in general. So I see an acupuncturist. I still see my practitioner for bioenergy work. I also started to work with a German new medicine practitioner. And so there's a lot of different avenues that I took and tried, and and I go back to every now and then, and they're kind of on my roster. When I need them, I call them. And then there are things that I just started to lean more towards because I was getting results and I was getting answers that I needed, and I was starting to feel more confident to be able to see how things were progressing with me emotionally and physically and mentally and spiritually. And so the team is still there, but it's sort of kind of morphed into something different as my needs started to change and as I wanted to explore more of the emotional side to the diagnosis, which is a very, very important part, I think, because I don't think you escape this life unscathed somehow. It comes to you somehow. And so it's about dealing with how those things happened, and it changes the whole dynamic. It changes the dynamic of family and friends. And, I don't always necessarily notice the changes because I'm with them every day for myself. But other people notice it.
Like what?
Well, just how I approach situations now. I come
What's different?
Well, I come from a background of being very much a people pleaser. And I just wanted to keep the peace. I wanted to not be in conflict. I didn't want to upset the apple cart. Family was able to, kind of get away with things that just became no longer acceptable. And so, that people pleasing I'm not going to say it's gone, because those behaviors are very deep rooted, and sometimes they show up and I'm like, oh, okay, wait a second. What are we doing here? Hold on a minute. I've been here before. I didn't like this. And so I learned to set boundaries, and I learned to speak up, and I learned to say no. And when they say no is a complete sentence, it's actually true. It's a complete sentence. And so I started to learn those things through listening to like numerous podcasts. And, I was really wanting to absorb all of that information. And then I kind of took what I needed from it and created my own sort of version of that. And the lump is still there. I still, so I just want to make that clear to anyone who's listening. It's not like, oh, this is all done and dusted now, I'm healed and we move along. It's like the lump is still there, and I do monitor it with thermography, and I keep an eye on it every 6 months, and so I'm stable. And I mean, it's stable. So there's not a lot, like there's not that there's not a lot more to do, but once that stability was there, and again, it can always toy with me. I'll be very honest. It can toy with me sometimes. But I have to go back to, okay, how do I feel? What do I look like? How's my complexion? How are my eating habits? How are my sleeping habits? Because those things will tell you those things tell me how I'm doing.
Right.
So if I know, look, I'm not sleeping well, work is particularly stressful at the moment, I'm not coping with things very well, that's when I have to take a step back and
really
sort
great.
of, review
Yeah.
that and say, like, okay, what do we need to tweak a little bit? Are we forgetting some things? And the
So
answers
good.
come.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So a couple of things that you're speaking. One thing I wanted to just sort of kind of underline is a few times a little bit earlier in this conversation, you said something about, so when you first found out and then there was some emotion and so on, and then you said, okay, what can I control? And you said my diet, my nutrition.
Yeah.
And then there was another point where you said also about the, the doctor provided you with, you could do this, this, and this, but you wanted to be in control. So the word control, I heard a few times.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate that you said you can't control everything, but what can you control? You can only control your own behavior. And so I think while a lot of us know that, it's
Mhm.
another thing to actually live according to that. And so I think if we want to kind of leave people with this conversation with, what are a few underlying markers here?
Mhm. Mhm.
It seems to me like one is that you thought in terms of what kind of life do I want to live? What works for me? What doesn't work for me? So having a vision,
Yeah.
right? Knowing kind of who you are and what's your vision, right? So I don't
Yeah. And
see
how do you
myself.
see that playing out? How do you see
Yeah,
that playing out every day with your
right.
family, with your friends, and most importantly, when you're on your own? How do you
Yes,
see that playing out? Because
right.
we can all be different people in front of different people, but when you're lying in bed at night and you're either alone or even if someone is next to you, you're kind of with your own thoughts. And
Yes,
who are you going to be? Who are you going to show up for? Because I really had
right.
to start showing up for myself. I was
Hmm.
showing up for a lot of people, but it was time to start showing up for myself. And that's where, the boundaries come in
Yes.
and getting clear on that. And, I think control gets a bad rap because
Hmm.
people think, oh, you're controlling and you have to, and I think there's a time and a place for everything. And
Hmm.
sometimes you have to claim control over a situation. Otherwise, you're going to, I could have easily found myself being led down this path that I'm inside screaming, no, 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 I don't want to do that. But if I had thought to myself, well, no, you don't want to be a control freak, because those are the common words these days. And they know more, they know better. That's not always the case. We've
Hmm.
really been led to believe that that's the case, but nobody, and I will just underline this, nobody knows your body better than you do. Nobody, period. Like, so you have the authority over how that's going to go down. And if you
Hmm.
want to hand that over to someone, that's fine. Just be aware that you're doing that. And it's not out of a place of fear or out of a place of inferiority or thinking that someone knows more. Just, just step into the fact that you have lived in that body for your entire life. And
Yeah.
you can figure it out. You can figure it out. You got to listen, and there's tools and there's people that you can talk to. And it's not, I would not have been able to do this without the team that I have, because
Hmm.
they're amazing. They're
Yeah.
amazing. So,
So So great. It's all very empowering, at least from the way I'm hearing you, which is why I wanted to have this conversation with you. So in closing, would you say that now here we are 4 years later,
mhm.
um, what would you say in terms of the vision that you had that you then decided to make a plan in accordance with? and how your life is now. What can you say about just how your life is now? Is it manifesting in the way that you envisioned that it would? Is it better? Is it worse? Or, what's
So that's a really good question. I have extremely high expectations for myself. Okay.
Mhm.
Which I will be bloody honest, are very rarely met.
Mhm.
They are met in hindsight. Okay. When I
Mhm.
look back now and I look at, what I was envisioning, and it hasn't gone the way I planned necessarily. Yes, I'm stable, and but I expected that, okay, the lump was going to be gone and I was going to start doing this, and I had this plan, and when it started to not go that way, I was like, oh, okay, well, we need to deviate and change and, kind of move and flow with it. But I think adaptability, is really critical. And it's helped me
Mhm.
because it's like, I think I've really come to appreciate that I'm where I need to be. And I always used to think that's so cliche. I used to hear people say that, and I used to think, oh God, yeah, we're exactly where we're meant to be, and everything happens for a reason. And, we hear those things so often, and they become cliche. And having said that, I know that anything that takes me off of what I thought my path was going to be, there's some kind of gold at the end of that road. Like
Mm.
there's a nugget of something. And sometimes it can be very subtle, and sometimes it can be very obvious. But the personal journey that I've gone down, I would not trade for the world. Like I
Mm.
wouldn't go back. If people said, look, we
Yeah.
could just take you back, no, and I'm like, I wouldn't go back. I would stay here, because there's nothing juicier and more delicious than doing that work, because it ends up coming back tenfold, and the people around you start to notice, and it changes them. It changes
Mhm.
them too, and they've changed me. And so it's this kind of, it's this give and take, and
Yeah.
it's a really good place to be. And so I don't know if I've answered your question.
I think so.
Yeah, this is not necessarily where I thought I'd be, but there's nowhere else I'd rather be.
Oh,
Yeah,
so well said.
if that's, if that
That's
answers the
great.
question.
No, that's really great. Listen, Lisa, just for everybody listening, at Thermography Clinic, we don't tell people what we think they should do and how they should. I mean, we really are here to provide valuable information to help people make their own choices. And we
Yes.
like to think that we empower people to do that. So, speaking to you today, and, is not to say that everybody should do what you're doing. Um, the reason why I really wanted to have this conversation, though, is because you are doing it, and there are people who are doing it. And I speak to a lot of people who come to our clinic um, with a diagnosis, and sometimes not with a diagnosis, but the ones that come with, it's, sometimes I refer to you. I'll say there's someone who comes here and this is what she's done, right?
Yeah.
So you have been someone who's an example. And I think it's just good for people to know that there is such an example. You're not the only one in the world, but you're one in the world who is here right now doing that. So
Yeah.
I want people to know that. I want you to know that you're an inspiration. I love you from the bottom of my heart. You you empower me in the work that I do,
Thank
so
you.
yeah, for sure. And I think there's a lot that people can take from this. I'm sure you and I could sit here and talk for
We could.
much longer,
We
but I
could.
think we got some really good pieces there that
Yeah.
ideally will make a difference for people. So thank you.
And
And
thank you. Thank you. Because when I didn't know where to go and somebody suggested thermography, I didn't even know that that was an option. And
Mhm.
someone suggested it to me, and I looked you guys up, and I just got a good vibe. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try these guys, and now it's been how long it's been.
Yeah.
And you and Alex have been like crucial in this time for me, because when I have been in fear, I've had conversations with Alex when we're going through reports and stuff like that, about and my fears. And you both have a very grounded way to approach that. And so, you're part of the team. Like when I talk about the team, you're in that team. And yay, you're in that team. And, and it's a huge part because that's my, one of the main ways that I monitor my health, because there's just so many inconsistent other ways. So I just want to say thank you to you too, and to Alex, and, for all of you there at Thermography Clinic, because, when you walk in there, it's a good environment. Like there's a good vibe. It's like, okay, we're not walking into a clinical setting that is scary. And, you're very much clear with, that you're here to help. And that's really important. So
thank
grateful.
you so much. Great. All right. So upward and onward.
Yes.
And again, thank you so much for your talk today.
Thank you. Take
You're
good
welcome.
care.
You too.